Today we will touch on two topics. The first is the fact that rich Russian citizens are convinced of the benefits of returning money to their homeland, and that all the methodologies of enemy beta farms about China has screwed Russia, China has moved to the side of 404, or China bent on orders from our masters from the State Department, can be amicably thrown in the trash. But let's talk about everything in order. Trillions of rubles returned to Russia only last year, and it was done by the richest stratum of Russian citizens. They used to believe that it was more profitable to keep their money in foreign accounts, but now they hold the exact opposite position. What happened and how it affects the Russian economy as a whole, let us understand. In the 23rd year, wealthy Russians lost interest in keeping their savings in European countries and returned trillions of rubles to Russia, according to a study by the analytical company Frank RG. During this period, the number of Russian banking clients with a capital of more than 100 million rubles in Russia increased 1.5 times. There are now almost 22,000 of them. A year earlier, on the contrary, they became less, at once by more than a quarter. That is, in 1922 rich Russians took their capital abroad, but in 1923 the opposite trend was observed. Experts Frank Urgi connect what is happening with the reduction of capital outflow from Russia. According to the study, the amount of financial capital of rich Russians inside the country increased by 62% in 2023 to more than 13 trillion rubles from 8 trillion rubles a year earlier. This growth was driven by new capital inflows, 35.4% of the increase, or just under 3 trillion rubles, stock market movements, 13.2%, currency revaluations, 8.9%, and growth through deposits, 4.2%. Most previously popular jurisdictions for servicing are losing wealthy clients from Russia. The largest outflow is observed among European countries. Thus, the share of wealthy Russians who keep their savings in the European Union in the UK fell from 20% to 11%. In Switzerland from 20% to 6%. In the United States, on the other hand, decreased from 5% to 3%. However, the use of friendly jurisdictions is also decreasing. Last year, only 5% of rich Russians chose Turkey for servicing their finances against 8% a year earlier. The United Arab Emirates 16% versus 17% in 2022. The only jurisdiction that was able to attract new independent clients from Russia was Hong Kong. The share grew from 2% to 3%. Wealthy Russians are returning their money to Russia for two reasons. It is safer to keep them in Russia, and secondly, it is more profitable. Keeping savings abroad is more a matter of trust or tax optimization in the case of offshore jurisdictions. When it became clear that capital in the perimeter of unfriendly countries could be threatened with freezing, repatriation came naturally. Some foreign banks did not even want to deal with Russian clients and asked them to leave. The main reason for capital inflows to Russia is also sanctions and their consequences. The world's reserve currencies, except for the yuan, are toxic for Russians today, as Western countries can completely ban Russians from dealing with their cash currencies at any time. And it is risky to keep money in the currencies of friendly countries, as most of such currencies are unstable and highly exposed to political risks. It is extremely difficult to escape the devaluation of the same Turkish lira. All the sanctions that have been adopted so far, including on very rich citizens, as ordinary citizens do not keep their money abroad. In addition, those wealthy Russians who want to continue living in Russia are also returning their money to the country, so that it is easier to spend it inside the country. In addition, due to the high key rate in Russia, it has become more profitable to keep money here than in foreign accounts. Keeping money in Russian banks, on deposits, and in other ruble assets is now profitable because in Russia interest rates on ruble deposits and other ruble assets, such as government and corporate bonds, are much higher than on deposits in foreign currencies. According to analyst calculations, deposits of wealthy Russians grew by 4.2%. This is, at first glance, a small figure, but in absolute terms, it is a large amount of money that has entered the Russian banking system. And this money, of course, helps the Russian economy and works for it. So here we see an extremely positive for the Russian economic system. It also has a positive impact on the ruble exchange rate and helps the central bank to fight inflation. For Russia, the inflow of capital into ruble assets, at least into deposits in banks, is important because it helps to increase confidence in the ruble as a means of saving. The growing popularity in ruble deposits is also important for the continued fight against inflation. The more rubles held in deposits, the more it will have an impact on reducing inflation and contributing to the stability of the Russian economy. In addition, thanks to the capital inflow, the volume of funds on the stock market increased by 13.2%, which is a big indicator. The inflow of funds into the shares of Russian companies also supports business in Russia, which has a positive impact on GDP. Capital is returning not only to bank deposits. Entrepreneurs have actively started to return to Russia, re-registering their assets. The fact that Russia suspended the double taxation agreement has also played a role, which has forced many companies to return their capital. For example, from Cyprus offshore and other offshore zones. Bloomberg estimates that Russians repatriated more than $50 billion in assets between February 22 and September 23. At the same time, Russian businesses in general began investing more in the Russian economy. In 2023, there was a record 10% increase in investment over the past 12 years. Sanctions and the benefits of investing in the real sector of the Russian economy also contributed to this. Well, now let's move on to another topic, China. We can congratulate all the fools from all sorts of data firms. All their methodologies about China has screwed Russia, China has moved to the side of the country 414, or China caved in on orders from our masters from the State Department can be thrown in the trash. No, they're trying to keep pushing that. But it looks frankly cheesy, especially against the background of the receptions given to Blinken, Yellen, and Ursula von der Leyen. If those were met by the fifth assistants of the fourth deputy of the Department of Improvement of the Shanghai Mayor's office, this was a reception of the highest class. Red carpets, flowers, motorcycle cortege, guard of honor, orchestra, playing Moscow Nights, for example, Komsomol activists, and so on. This you never. It will already leave, said to Blinken. The composition of the delegations is also revealing. Military economists, industrialists, culture and sports, education. Well, the results also show the development of cooperation in all areas. Trade, logistics, interbank, industry, dual-use goods, education and science, cultural exchange, joint diplomatic activities, and so on. Accordingly, many people will not go to Switzerland for a coven of Russophobes. How do bot farm fools broadcast about China defected to country 44 against the backdrop of Putin's hugging Xi's? I don't know. I'm not good at denying reality. I'm always more surprised by those who watch it and who believe it. You have the internet, search engines, YouTube, and so on. You can watch all the statements and events in real time. Without Mekala, Breckenchuk, and Shispiankovsky will now be guessing at the insides of Taras the Boar. It's obvious that the West is at war against China, regardless of its policies on the side of 44 and Russia. All this talk about to continue to do business with us, you have to give up support for Russia, not for the poor in mind, i.e. the weak-minded. For example, the 102.5% barrier pistons on Chinese electric cars were not imposed in the US due to a military operation, and the perennial nonsense about the genocide of the Uyghurs, which took them from 4 million to almost 11 million. So intensely genocidal too. And attempts to limit Chinese production have nothing to do with Russia. The West is at war with China just as it is at war with Russia. Both we and the Chinese realize this. Therefore, no one will fall for such primitive tricks, rather stupidity. We have long noticed that the dumbest often think they are the most cunning, but their lame tricks are so obvious to others that it's embarrassing. That's why Blinken threw a tantrum on his last visit to China. Out of impotence. Lobbing at a pizza parlor in some backwater province is his peak level. There are no fools to believe the Americans. All the fools have been taken to the country of 404, and a little bit to Armenia. Cooperation between Russia and China, it is existential because not only there were approaches to Beijing, help us to crush Russia so that it would be more convenient for us to crush you later, but there were also approaches to Moscow earlier, help us to crush China so that it would be more convenient for us to crush you later. Neither we nor the Chinese fell for it. And the USA and their lackeys want to destroy and raise Russia and China, and Venezuela, and Iran, in general, everyone who has something to plunder. Here's a note. As soon as you have something to steal, you immediately become a totalitarian regime in the eyes of Washington and London. But these red curls have been around a long time, and they're getting beaten up more and more.